You are welcome. This episode focuses on painting man's rich inner life in relation to his sensory perception and outward exertion. That rich inner life constitutes the unique human experience that man enjoys. We observed in the previous episode, albeit in passing, that such uniqueness reflects man's inclination to self-interrogate or self-criticize. We are expounding on that in this episode. But before we get to that, we need to appreciate what human autonomy constitutes. And that is because in one way or another, human autonomy colors or shapes our experiences and the manner of our self-direction. We noted previously that man's consciousness and his physical form cohere in the brain, which is the coordination center of the nervous system. Now, the human brain, and by extension the entire body, is wired, so to speak, for consciousness. And so it is understandable that in seeking to model the brain, we would actually need to model the body. The body can be likened to numerous miniature computers with specialized functions, all linked or networked in an encompassing supercomputer, which is the brain. The screen or display of that supercomputer, albeit a biological organ, is the mind. The mind is continually eyeballed and engaged by the inner man. I hope you internalized what the inner man is from the previous episodes of the series. Anyhow, the inner man is at the center of one's experiences, which entails shaping and deciphering the sensory perceptions that display in the mind. Additionally, the inner man is central to managing one's physical exertions, which similarly transmit via the mind. In that way, the inner man is the fulcrum of one's free will. Free will is the autonomy to pivot self without undue constraint or compulsion by agency other than one's own will. That is what free will is, the autonomy to pivot self without undue constraint or compulsion by agency other than one's own will. As such, free will implies, and I underline that word, implies. Free will implies wholesome self-direction by way of rational and moral exertion. From the foregoing, it means that free will does not only inform one's autonomy, but also encompasses cognizance of the individual's sanctity. That explains why only the individual may access his interiority or inner sanctum. Then again, it tells why only the individual can engage his agency, or will for that matter, in a manner that facilitates his well-being and fulfillment. The individual's decisions or choices and actions turn on his free will. Those choices and actions either foster or undermine his inner well-being and fulfillment. Now, the individual's actions also affect those close to him or those associated with him. Therefore, a person ought to consider the implications of his will or the manner of his self-direction. As described previously, consciousness reflecting upon itself renders one's interiority as clear as the light of day. The inner man, and as such the individual, inclines by his free will to unpick the rich tapestry of the psychical inclinations which support the cognitive function and self-direction. And so, instead of the individual groping in the dark concerning what transpires on the inside, he would observe in the mind's eye the workings of the various inner features. In that way, the individual would not only appreciate the critical role that the psychical inclinations perform in facilitating experiences and engendering inner well-being, he would also be empowered to exert or manage them in full knowledge of what he would be doing. What then are the psychical inclinations? How do they support one's cognitive function and self-direction? As a backdrop to the detailed portrayal of man's psychical inclinations, it is necessary to recap the broad outlines of the relationship between consciousness and man's physical form. Of course, those broad outlines are the larger framework in which the psychical inclinations operate. Still, in the endeavor to build a rounded picture of the psychical inclinations, we ought to unpick the misconceptions that cloud or obscure man's inner workings. The misconceptions do not only obscure man's inner life, they actually constrain the wholesome self-direction of those who unwittingly or even knowingly espouse them. Here are the broad outlines painted above regarding the relationship between consciousness and the human body. When the individual comes to grips with his inner sanctum, that development confers a sound grasp of the soul, which is the human form, as one with consciousness. The phrase "to experience the soul" is a misnomer. It creates the impression that we may discern our interiority through the physical senses, and in that case via the brain. Whereas we register physical stimuli or exteriority as sensory perception, it is impossible to have, so to speak, a reverse function of the physical senses to grasp one's interiority. To attempt that could be likened to stretching to the back of the mirror to find yourself, or trying to take hold of yourself by clutching at your mirror image. As already indicated, consciousness intuits itself. Consciousness facilitates sensory experience and informs the mind, which is the interface of man's spiritual core and his physical form. As such, recognizing consciousness grants the individual appreciation of the soul as the sum or composite of body and spirit, which contrasts with the erroneous notion that the soul is a thing or something detached from one's physical form. Against the backdrop of what I've just explained, let me point to key misconceptions on this matter by Descartes. We referred to René Descartes in an earlier episode. The misconceptions by Descartes informed his inadequate view of man's interiority. He did not distinguish between thought and consciousness. As observed in a couple of earlier episodes, thought is the function by which consciousness puts meaning to experiences or refines existing knowledge. And while consciousness thinks about things other than itself, that is, sensations or perceptions as well as existing knowledge, the human essence reflects upon itself. In fact, consciousness reflecting upon itself is the crux of self-interrogation, which bolsters the quality of one's thought. The other mystery by Descartes is this, that mind, whose principal attribute or function he considered to be thought, is detached from the body machine, or your body for that matter. However, given what we covered in the preceding episodes concerning the centrality of self-knowing vis-a-vis sensory perception, the mind and thought, it is rendered explicit how the misreading by Descartes, which presents a crass dichotomy of mind and body, provokes ridicule. Still, the soul isn't in the pineal gland as Descartes construed. The soul is the totality of your existence insofar as you think, talk, eat, and sense or carry yourself in space and time. While one could, in a general sense, use the terms consciousness and soul interchangeably, the soul is strictly the human form as one with consciousness. These three, heart, mind, and soul, are respectively man's spiritual core, his psychophysical interface, and then the embodied composite. The three constitute bona fide layers or facets of man's psychophysical formation. Accordingly, it should not pass for sheer repetition of like terms, possibly for emphasis, if one were charged to love God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Repetition of analogous terms in this case would be obviously redundant. It is also worth noting that no matter how advanced the brain imaging technology gets, such cannot enable the marking out of a person's mind, let alone consciousness. The individual's mind is directly accessible to only himself. We may, as we should in relating to others, follow the trend of their thoughts or read the meaning of their actions. However, even if we were psychic interlopers or had a view of brain activity via some top-notch brain imaging technology, we would never be able to enter or inhabit another person's interiority. Only the individual is privileged to access his inner sanctum. That, again, underscores the sanctity and autonomy of the individual. Now, sound grasp of the soul does not only enable cognizance of the psychophysical dynamics as I presented in the previous episode, but it also renders each psychical inclination distinct. And to distinctly grasp the psychical inclinations is vital because it keeps the individual awake to his inner workings, which facilitates conscientious or wholesome self-direction. The psychical inclinations consist of the inner motions and then the inner processes. One's inner processes, such as motive, thought, imagination, some aspects of memory, etc., are direct or explicit exertions of the inner man. In other words, the inner processes proceed from the conscious and deliberate exertion of one's will. On the other hand, the inner motions are draped around the inner man and effuse more or less spontaneously to accord distinctiveness, or in a manner of speaking, color and nuance to each experience and each exertion. For most people, the easily identifiable inner emotions are the emotions associated with, for instance, joy, excitement, sadness, fear, or anger. Like a painter holding a paintbrush together with the various paint colors, which in this case are the inner emotions and inner processes, the inner man shapes and deciphers or accords meaning to experiences. And so the inner man, and as such the individual, is participant and observer in his experiences, which inclines him to be self-critical in whatever he does. Self-criticism entails examining or interrogating the workings of the psychical inclinations in order to uphold their proper function and ensure the authenticity of experiences. That turns up one's psychological as well as mental muscle, and increasingly renders solid the will or power by which the individual holds himself together. Therefore, we cannot overstate the obligation of the individual to oversee the function of the psychical inclinations toward conscientious self-direction. As aforementioned, the inner man, or the individual for that matter, is at the center of exerting or managing the ensemble of inner emotions and inner processes. The psychical inclinations operate in concert and in a versatile manner, nimbly dovetailed or overlapping to facilitate all-round engagement with one's perceptions or experiences. Take, for instance, what is generally regarded as thought. When we engage in thought, we are invariably seeing. Seeing ties in with interpretation, and interpretation involves imagination. Imagination invariably calls up memory. Memory is closely tied to language, and our emotions and feelings accord all these goings on distinctiveness. Again, a person cannot engage or exert any of his inner processes without willing it and simultaneously having the outflow of these other psychical inclinations. As you watch now, you are seeing, as it were, imagining and associating impressions or ideas. Moreover, you are focusing while your mind is open to intuitions that surface from time to time. Still, you are listening to all of it, and all the while, these inner motions and inner processes are being recorded in your memory. When the inner man peers at something or ponders over it, the subject sooner or later lays bare its secrets. It is from such unveiling, so to speak, that ideas sprout. By ideas here, I generally mean knowledge or perceptions, which may match the facts of a matter or hold some degree or perhaps no correspondence to reality. There is no method for seeing. We see or come to see, or we are blind to a given reality. It is the eye of the soul or the cognitive lens within that sees. One must incline to see or possess the capacity to grasp, for instance, the mathematics or physics underlying physical phenomena. The material reality or conditions surrounding us are swiftly relayed to the brain via the sensescapes, and our outlook or frame of reference mediates whatever we sense. That outlook or perceptual prism may include myths, the prevailing social and cultural mentalities, language, and all the ways by which man ordinarily structures his existence. However, the actual power of discernment lies with the inner man or the cognitive lens within, which refines our perceptions and enables us to grasp experiences or discern the proper connection between things. What we perceive registers in our minds as impressions or images. Those experiences, which we invariably label or name, are likely kept in the psychical store or memory. So, when someone, for instance, says elephant, a matching image pops to the fore of our mind, along with the other associations that we may have formed from imagination or from the actual experience of an elephant. The associations relating to the experience of an elephant may include shapes and color, smells, the obtaining weather conditions, or our personal reaction to the image or actual encounter with an elephant. Given the foregoing, memory is information or experiences backed up in the psyche, but on which the inner man isn't focusing at a given time. However, the inner man could retrieve or call up those experiences in due course, or a past experience may involuntarily pop up to the fore of the mind. We are mostly conditioned to name or label things in the manner or language of the environment in which we are situated. Hopefully, the labels represent an accurate or proper grasp of the realities in question. When we mischaracterize something or fall short of grasping it for what it is, and then presume that the label appended accurately represents the reality in question, we sooner or later get lost in interpretation or fail to place that given reality in its broader context. The typical example in this series are the misconceptions dealt with regarding the heart or spirit, mind, soul, and the psyche. If a given language does not have a name for something, it does not necessarily mean that the speakers of that language are incapable of perceiving that thing or phenomenon. They could be at a loss conceptualizing it, or their eyes may be glossing over the phenomenon. Words are the dress or vehicle of man's inner life. They constitute the verbalization of our interiority. In other words are the exteriorization of the mental images representing our experiences. The sum of those verbalizations constitute language, which is a collection of labels or symbols that a given people assign to experiences of their place and time. That makes language reflective of a social or cultural setting and is invariably potent with the past. Words, just like the thoughts that inform them, do not simply carry meaning. They have a spellbinding effect on the one who utters them, as well as the person to whom they are directed. Words are potent because they convey or project will and the associated motives. Therefore, it should not be surprising that words can be inspiring or rabble-rousing, and what we say can indeed injure, scar, or shackle others on the inside. We ordinarily know that it is possible to hurt people with what we may discount as mere words. When language, which primarily conveys motive and paints or projects experiences is somewhat detached from man's inner voice. It independently influences how we see and affects the manner of our raciocination or reason. Therefore, we ought to be watchful not to let the narrowness or diffuseness of a language preclude wholesome experience. Experience transcends language, which makes it all the more crucial for the individual to raise or evolve his consciousness above the confines of language and thus foster an open mind. In that way, one's experiences will not be unduly constrained by the symbols or language of a given place or time. We noted above that will, which bears one's motives or intentions, underpins the psychical workings and the physical exertion of the individual. Now, motive is to will what direction is to physical geography. Man wills himself into any given choices or possibilities of the human spirit, and that includes, among other things, love and hate. That explains why motive is a powerful thing in our day-to-day existence. When we do something in good faith or goodwill, or if our intentions are not entirely positive, which is ill will or bad faith, the given motive enhances or undermines our exertions and sense of well-being. Nevertheless, being attuned to self raises our sense of right and wrong, which renders the individual balanced or fair-minded. Given emotions accord distinctiveness to our experiences and exertions. Let's elaborate that with these familiar instances. The sky is mostly blue, but it isn't the exact nuance of blue all the time and at every location. Some food is yellow and other food is green, etc. Some of that food is bland in taste. Other food is hot or chilly, yet other food is sweet or bitter or sour. Every fruit has its unique color and shape. Each thing that we eat has its distinct flavor, that is, smell and taste. Your enjoyment of sleep last night was not the same as the night before. We enjoy sleep differently when it rains, and perhaps a nap after lunch isn't the same kind of sleep as that of nighttime. We ordinarily tell the shriek or cry of terror from the howl of pain or the shout of joy. We distinguish the cynical chuckle from the warm, hearty laugh, and there is the genuine smile as opposed to the forced or fake smile. We discern calm, agitation, or thoughtfulness in a person's voice. Each season of the year is different. The greenery, the rain or snowfall, the cloud cover or sunny outlook, etc., render each season unique. Now, the instances of distinctiveness I have just mentioned mirror how emotions accord color and nuance to our experiences. Emotions are as infinite as the range of possibilities of human experience. For instance, they include the distinctiveness that informs quietude or inner silence, anger, disgust, exhilaration, inner warmth, or indeed one's mood on a sunny or rainy day. Now, because we often exert ourselves without proper inner differentiation, we tend to regard almost every psychical inclination as emotion. Take, for example, what is commonly regarded as romantic love. It is not simply an emotion. It is primarily two people's fondness for each other, with the possibility of bonding on all the layers or facets of the two souls. That fondness or bonding is colored by given emotions that other people may recognize. As I have already stated, the emoting of our experiences imbues each experience or exertion with uniqueness, just like the soundtrack of a movie contributes to the mood or ambience of ongoing action and whatever we see on the screen. Without emotions, all our expressions would be flat, that is, more or less the same, which would undermine our exertions, interactions, and fulfillment. Imagine having a conversation with someone who speaks in monotone and whose face remains expressionless, regardless of the happiness, sadness, or anger that the person may be experiencing. A rich inner life invariably entails a mix or mingle of emotions, which now and then build into passion. Passion is inner inclination dialed up or stirred by will a notch higher than usual. Ordinarily, however, one is in a calm emotional state. Regardless of whether one is in a passionate or calm state, when the individual is well adjusted or attuned to his interiority, that inner space would be a stream of tranquility which enhances his perceptiveness and inner warmth, as well as fellow feeling or affection for others. But if the individual isn't properly in touch with his interiority, the manner of extending himself to others would be either overstretched or inhibited or perhaps jumbled. Such a person's emotions and feelings would be out of tune or cranky. That may not be obvious to the people around the individual, and the problem could be a widespread or general malaise reflecting the conformist sort of aberrance highlighted, I believe, in episode 2 of this series. Emotions invariably dovetail with feelings. Feelings reflect our attitude to things and experiences, including the knowledge we come by. They constitute intuitions, our initial impressions, or our reaction to something. The impressions may or may not match the facts of a matter, but we can work with them to build proper understanding. When one's interiority is encrusted or plastered over with raw or unexamined attitudes, such as stereotypes or prejudice, then the perceptiveness of the cognitive faculty is undermined. Moreover, holding on to impressions that do not correspond to reality taints every exertion related to those impressions, including our relationships. As I've already indicated, sometimes our feelings are in fact intuitions. Intuition constitutes sudden insight on any matter and springs from the continuous whirl or roving eye of consciousness. Intuitions surface or pop up with or without prompting by the individual. A given insight could suddenly flash across one's mind, or the person could examine what surfaced earlier, depending on his interests or inclinations. Sometimes intuition ties in with instinct, some of which would alert one to danger and incline him to quick action, such as fight or flight. The entire ensemble or concert of psychical inclinations is also facilitated by the process of imagination. Imagination entails visualizing mental pictures of things or experiences. To visualize or envision something springs from the inner man and projects onto the mind as mental images. Imagination features in the mental experiments of how things, that includes movement or actions, experiences, ideas, and knowledge fit or should fit together. And if a person envisioned something and then appropriately exerted his will to bring it to fruition, he would have engaged his creative power. In light of the inner features I have described above, it is necessary to make the distinction, albeit a thin one, between mental activity and psychological processes. The former constitutes what transpires in the mind in view of perception and the interpretation of experiences and any corresponding physical exertion. On the other hand, psychological processes encompass the entire range or ensemble of psychical inclinations that underlie and shape mental exertion. Therefore, psychological activity entails the backstage workings of one's mental processes and physical exertion. To unpack and envision, or as might be, observe in the mind's eye the various inner features affords one a rich or reflective inner life. The individual is empowered to exert or rein in his psychological processes, fully aware of what he would be doing. By such insight or inner sight, the individual enjoys mental clarity. And as I've variously painted above, mental clarity implies that one is consciously situated inside and outside of experiences, which renders those experiences distinct in the mind and easily criticizable to the individual. And so, the individual engages sensory perception in a self-critical manner, which facilitates a rounded view of experiences as well as psychological steadiness. As it were, with insight, the individual is capacitated to hold himself together and thus helpfully exert himself. The exercise of will over the various inner features, which is the basis of self-control and discipline, fosters psychological stability and mental well-being. We may distill the diverse aspects of man's interiority I have painted above into three pillars that fortify each other. One is self-knowing. Two is rationality. And three is personal autonomy. The three are the pillars of man's rich interiority, mental well-being, and wholesome outward exertion. Once a person's essential identity or self-knowing is crumbled, the manner of their exertion is undermined. When the person's rationality is compromised, the power of consciousness is dampened. The same negative turn occurs when one's autonomy is meddled with. We may have heard it said that the human brain is more powerful than all the computers the world over put together. If, for a moment, we took that to be accurate, can we then fathom the exceptional vitality of consciousness which is the real force behind the mind, and recognizing the power integral to the ensemble of the inner motions and inner processes. Could we imagine what happens to a person or groups of people when the aforesaid ensemble is repressed, battered, or scarred? If a person with a hazy sense of interiority were to have his psychical inclinations scarred and running amok, what manner of inner turmoil would that person experience? That would invariably present as persistent, confusing, and distressing memories and the associated mad emotions, which, as it were, is the outward portrait of psychological trauma. While man's interiority is ideally a sea of calm energies, that inner space is prone to disturbance or turmoil. Man's inner space can be repressed, get shackled, or battered. Consequently, the psyche becomes malformed or distorted in the manner of its function. The foregoing calls for conscientious self-direction. It demands sustained engagement of the intellect, which is the exertion of the mind with due regard for the rational and moral sensibility of consciousness. And that presupposes an appreciation of the role of moral sensibility vis-a-vis the function of the intellect.